are the Black psychologists. And the reason that was important in terms of humanistic psychology, the reason why that's important because when I went to the conference in Philadelphia, there was a prominent question being asked: where are our Black humanistic psychologists? I think the answer lies in the work that Dr. Jenkins has left for us and given us, even to be remembered in what he's doing in the here and now. I spoke to his son. Where is he? Oh, okay. Oh, there you are. So I got myself cute to see you there. I spoke to his son, Chris Jenkins, and I asked him, I said, what, if any, message would you want me to share on behalf of you and your family for the work that you know of your father? And what he said, I think, is our answer for Division 32, which is they're incredibly proud that he remains in the minds of folks, acknowledging his impact on Division 32 and ABA beyond his 10 years of retirement. So I say here, I think that's our charge, is how do we keep his work in the forefront of what we do and who we are. And if we do that correctly and earnestly, we will no longer have to ask, where are our Black humanistic psychologists? I want to close with this proverb, because it's very important to us, and I think it's meaning for me when I think about his work. If we stand tall, it's because we stand on the shoulders of many ancestors. I want to appreciate Dr. Jenkins for answering the call of his ancestors and standing tall for us and leaving us a strong legacy.
There is something about being the last one in the line. You hear names that are familiar to you, Raoul May, and reference to including the participants in the work which came up in the presentation of Michelle Fine this morning. For those of you who were there, so it was nice to get to touch a variety of bases there. And thanks to my colleagues in Division 32. I am very appreciative of receiving the 2016 Division 32 Award for Distinguished Lifetime Contributions to Humanistic Psychology. Naturally, one always feels me. That doesn't apply, but I'll take it. Thank you. I feel quite honored to be in the company of eminent recipients of this award. The working out of my ideas over the years has drawn on the thinking of colleagues in this society who've been helpful to me in considering a variety of issues relevant to humanistic psychology. I'll confine my remarks today to a core theme that I've tried to put to use in my writing on psychological issues with people of color. That theme is reflected in a comment made in an essay written some 40 years ago by Joseph Richlack. He noted that there are a variety of emphases among psychologists working within the humanistic perspective. However, he felt that a philosophic tie binds all humanists, namely, quote, the assumption that the individual makes a difference or contributes to the flow of events, unquote. I came across this comment at a point in my career when I was searching to find a way of applying useful psychological perspectives to the political awakening happening in the African American community. Richlack's view was consistent with the work of another humanist psychology colleague of mine at NYU, where I was on the faculty. That colleague was Isidore Chine, who promoted an active image of the human being in contrast to the reigning mechanistic image of the person in psychology. The person, in Chine's view, is an active, responsible agent, not simply a helpless, powerless reagent. Such a being is one, quote, who seeks to generate circumstances that are compatible with the execution of his or her intentions. A being who seeks to shape the environment rather than passively permitting him or herself to be shaped by the latter. A being, in short, who insists on injecting him or herself into the causal process of the surrounding world. Unquote. These days, the foregrounding of individual functioning has become somewhat controversial, but I want to suggest the usefulness such a focus had for me, and then return to say a few words concerning how I think this traditional humanistic perspective fits into our current concerns about engaging respectfully with other cultures. As it happens, ideas about the individual as agent were consistent with my long-standing view of the person psychologically. I had always been interested in the variety of ways we engage life subjectively, and how that relates to our behavior as persons. In college, among a variety of thinkers, I was attracted to the writing of Ralph Waldo Emerson and his notions of the human being. For example, and I'll edit this for inclusive language, quote, if a person is at heart just, then insofar is she or he God. Wherever a human being comes, there comes revolution. The human being is the wonder worker. She is seen amid miracles. Now that ennobled portrait of human potential provided some of the fuel for my occupational ambitions to help people to a sense of their capacity. In my graduate training in psychology, I gravitated to psychoanalytic theory because it seemed to take the depths and pluralities of human experience seriously. And I applied aspects of that perspective to clinical work with broad groups of middle and working class clients. However, by the late 1960s, psychology was beginning to feel the impact of a younger generation, as we know, that was loudly critiquing broad facets of American society. Specifically, many psychologists of color began to express concern over psychology's inability to truly engage with ethnic minority communities. While having generally melioristic attitudes toward people of color, it seemed that psychology was still too much a part of the history and development of the broader American culture to make a clear and fair analysis of the nature and effects of the racial situation. So, for example, the psychiatrists Gardner and Ovesey, thinking of themselves as describing sympathetically the mark of oppression left by racism on African Americans, noted in their book that because of the results of personal and institutional racism, quote, the Negro has no possible basis for a healthy self-esteem, unquote. Where was the chronicling by mainstream behavioral scientists of Black people's loving sacrifices made for their children's benefit? The steady employment at more than one low-paying job in order to make ends meet. The sustaining of an essentially humanitarian perspective toward the world in spite of the social injustices they were enduring. For fuller descriptions of minority communities struggling with problems of class and caste, much was being missed. During this period, a number of African American psychologists, as Theopia has suggested, has implied, rejected altogether the traditional social science perspectives and models and developed an Afrocentric psychological approach to theory and practice, which emphasized the persistence of African cultural perspectives among African Americans. Now, it's not as if there had been no other viewpoints available on minority people. Scholars and observers from outside of the traditional behavioral sciences, persons in the arts and letters who remained closer to the human complexities of people in these communities, had for a long time been telling a different story about the lives and struggles of people of color. As I joined efforts to find correctives to the traditional social science understanding of the experience and behavior of African Americans, I found useful insights in the writing of some of these Black scholars. In addition, I felt that the clarity of their expression had implications that were open to more formal psychological consideration as well. Perspectives being advanced by some humanistic psychologists were apt. For me, Richlack's systematic approach to humanistic psychology was useful. For example, I had been particularly captivated by a comment that the major American novelist Ralph Ellis made in describing a principal motive that had burned within him. He noted in an essay that he had set himself the goal as a writer, quote, to commemorate in fiction that which I believe to be enduring and abiding in our situation, especially those human qualities which the American Negro has developed despite and in rejection of the obstacles and meannesses imposed upon us, unquote. Clearly, his was not an image of a people who had just passively permitted themselves to be shaped by their social environment over the centuries. Now, a key portion of Ellison's comment for me was the observation that African Americans have developed their human qualities despite and in rejection of the imposed historical meannesses. I related this phrase to a notion of how human beings conceptually structure the meaning of situations they face. One of the forms of human cognition that Richlack's humanistic perspective identifies is a dialectical thinking style. In this mode of thought, meaning is derived by attending to the opposite or alternative ways of construing a situation. As an aspect of psychological agency, then, dialectical thinking is the capacity that people have to imagine alternatives, even in the presence of a clearly defined circumstance. Thus, there's always more than one way. There's always more than one way to view a situation, which demands that the human being affirm some meaning at the outset for the sake of which behavior might then take place. Individuals necessarily contribute to their lives by how they frame events within the contexts in which they find themselves. Now, we can see this idea being expressed by other writers as well. While not using the term dialectic, the psychoanalyst Marshall Adelson suggested that such a feature of human thinking is fundamental to human symbolizing capacity. He noted that the human being, quote, symbolizes the invisible. She alone is able, in the presence of yes, to imagine no. In the absence of anything, to imagine something. In the presence of that which is, to imagine and act in terms of that which is not. And in any situation, to imagine alternatives and their possible consequences. Unquote. Now, for our purposes, the imaginative power of human mentality can provide perspectives leading to new and liberating behavior, or at the very least, to an alternative vision that sustains one's sense of humanity and opens the possibility of rejecting the meannesses imposed upon one. And so the essayist and novelist John Edgar Wideman notes, the historical mind of African people captive in the American South, quote, fashioned visions, dreams, and immaterial spiritual realm with the density, the hard and fast integrity of rungs on an iron ladder. The minds of my forebears found means to negotiate paths around and through the resistance. They envisioned freedom, the possibility of transcending all barriers, unquote. On this view, then, racially oppressed people in this country have to an important degree made a difference in their destiny by their capacity to imagine alternatives in the presence of constraining events, and then working over time, as China would have it, to generate the circumstances compatible with the execution of their intentions. Humanistic views, then, I'm suggesting, have provided psychology with broadly applicable tools which are specifically useful in providing a picture of the resilience of African Americans as well as other people of color in America. Now, my writing has been part of the effort to get psychology to consider the experience of people of color more authentically. My interests in this regard are certainly consistent with the growing concerns among humanistic psychologists to develop multicultural sophistication and competence, as in recent publications of Dr. Hoffman, for example. As noted earlier, I recognize that my remarks today have highlighted the functioning of the individual actor. However, like most humanistic psychologists, I fully acknowledge that our humanity must be seen from a variety of simultaneous vantage points. We are biopsychosocial beings. And in particular, as regards our interest in the third aspect of this triumvirate, the social, we rightly recognize that we would not be human, as we understand the term, without having developed within structured, sustaining, and enabling social contexts. We know further that cultures frame individual expression and development quite differently around the globe. For example, many large and stable cultures with ancient traditions produce a strongly relational quality in the experience of self. The processes of these sociocentric cultures elevate the person's role commitments to prominence. In these societies, the sense of we rather than I is important to the experience of self. However, to propose, as I have, that the individual as agent makes a causal difference in the flow of events is not to take an individualist bias. I do not see people as standing outside of the world of circumstances. We carry out our dialectic cognitive activities, for example, in the situations to which we are committed, to which we are thrown, if you insist. As I have suggested in some writing, this can be seen even in the more sociocentric societies. For example, the Confucian scholar Tu Huiming notes that in the modern Confucian perspective, the development of self is to be seen as, quote, a lifelong commitment which necessitates a ceaseless process of learning through the disciplining of the body and mind as an active participant in the living community, that is, the family, the province, the state, and the world, unquote. That we are fundamentally social beings does not override the humanistic recognition that we are also creatures who insist on being shapers of the worlds, the systems of which we are a part. And this seems to me to be consistent with the anthropologist Richard Schwader's definition of cultural psychology as, quote, the study of the ways psyche and culture, person and context, require each other and jointly make each other up, unquote. Our conscientious efforts to learn about and learn from even very different cultural perspectives are not in conflict with the broad image that humanistic psychology articulates of human beings as active, responsible agents who are both in and of their societal groups.